Not right now, we're not.
Yeah, we're not.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. This will be the Senate House Joint Conference Committee for the consideration of Senate File Number 40. If you would please call the roll. Oh, okay. Well then, let's go ahead and start. I'll just lay it out very quickly. So Senate File 40 started out as a committee bill. It was worked by the committee and passed by the House. And as it went to the Senate, there was an amendment that was added. That is the purpose of the discussion that we will have this afternoon. And I would turn that over to our good Senate co-chairman, Senator Land. Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. Obviously, fairly substantive, and it does involve an amendment that was put on by our Judiciary Chairman. So certainly we wanted to at least visit with you all about this and see if we couldn't get to some understanding of why that language was stricken. The bill came out of the Senate in really good shape. So the Senate liked it, and it's an important committee bill. So that's kind of where the Senate landed and why we didn't agree to it. We just thought it was better to have you explain to us what the deal is, okay?
All right, thank you, Mr. Senator.
Does that adequately represent Senator Anderson? Okay.
All right, well, thank you, Senator. And certainly it came out of the House with an overwhelming majority also. I've got the digest here. And I think it's fair to say that the Wyoming State Legislature has always been very careful when it comes to any matters that concern our military department. And everybody is fully behind our military department. So the question comes out, if you look at the full breadth of 719-106, access to and dissemination of information, what that 7-19-106. And so that particular statute talks about the access and dissemination of information. It deals with criminal history record information and shall be disseminated by criminal justice agencies in the state, whether directly to or through an intermediary, and then it lists the different agencies. One of them is other criminal justice agencies, other persons so designated, the department of that deals with our families, statistical research, the department that deals with health, the department that deals with nursing, the department that deals with licensure, and the list goes on and on and on. Further down the list, it talks about the military department. And when it was originally written, it said the military department for purposes of obtaining criminal history record information on prospective employees or volunteers. So that was the first issue, and that was addressed by this bill as it was brought before the Joint Committee. The military said, we have people who are getting ready to deploy or go on special duty or other things, and we need to be able to look at some criminal history information before we make those decisions, and the committee unanimously agreed with that. So we are modifying that language. That is not, there's no question about that. The question is, again, as it went through the Senate, an amendment was added, and I will just say that the amendment goes on to talk about requirements for obtaining criminal history record information under this paragraph. The military department may obtain the records of any completed investigation from the local law enforcement entity conducting the investigation, and the custodian of that information shall grant the right of inspection to the military department. I think the question arose because if you go back to the definition of criminal history record information, which is 719-103, Romanet 2, So criminal history record information means information, records, and data compiled by the criminal justice agencies on individuals for the purpose of identifying criminal offenders, criminal offenders consisting of identifiable descriptions of the offender and notations of a summary of the arrests, detentions, indictments, information, pretrial proceedings, the nature and disposition of criminal charges, sentencing, rehabilitation, incarceration, correctional supervision, and release. So it's really a very encompassing list. That list has been used by the department that deals with criminal investigation and other investigatory agencies for many, many years. In fact, that particular statute was last modified in 2016. It was written in 1987, last modified in 2016. And I think that the feeling of the committee on the House side was it's better to go with the existing definition as it has been in statute and as it has been used for years and years, rather than try to create a new, for lack of a better word, a new definition, which isn't actually as encompassing as what's in statute. So that would be, and I would just say, having practiced criminal law for a period of time, those criminal records are very closely protected. And in fact, if you look at the original statute, again, this is 719-106, that information is protected. If you go to the end of the statute, it talks about how that information will only be used for purposes that are lawful and under the laws of the state. It goes on to indicate, and I love this, no criminal justice agency or individual employed by the agency shall either confirm the existence or non-existence of criminal history. So there you go. Can either confirm or deny. That should get you a smile there, Mr. Chairman. But anyway, my point is that the statute is encompassing insofar as once the records are out there, there are directions to make sure that the information is protected.
Senator Anderson.
I think the problem we're having, 16 and on, the military department may obtain the records of any completed investigation from the local law enforcement. And what we're being told is that the military was not able to get the information on a completed investigation. And that was the big hangup. When they were going for, like you say, overseas or whatever they were doing, whatever they're deploying their guys, they couldn't get those records. Now, they weren't asking for anything that was open at the time. They were just asking for the completed investigation. And with a multitude of jurisdictions, they would not give that up. And that's what we were after. And I don't think the statutes let us do that.
So just real quickly, just to add to that, Mr. Co-Chairman, that was really the hinge point for the bill, is the fact that the military is running into difficulty getting some of the information that they need, and that comes at the local level. I appreciate the rundown and the explanation. It makes perfect sense, but I don't know that it fixes our problem. And so that's what I'd like to see if we can get to a little bit, a discussion about, okay, even if it exists here, somehow we've got local law enforcement agencies that are not cooperating with our military. So. Go ahead, please.
If I may, so I completely agree. We're at the heart of the issue. So we did have a discussion about this, what does completed investigation mean? It is an expansion on records that this department could get a hold of. It is necessarily information has constitutional protections, that has statutory, that has regulatory protections, and there's a reason, right? And so when we had this discussion so what are we looking at? And completed investigation in and of itself is problematic, in my opinion, and the reason that the Judiciary Committee in the end rejected this. Because, so when you really look at criminal investigations, first of all, arguably, there's no such thing. Interestingly, I would say the only time I could really say that you've got a completed investigation would probably be when somebody was, let's say, completely exonerated, false accusation, wait, wrong person, we're clearly going to take no further action on this. And, you know, which I don't know why that record would ever need to be passed on. But, so other than that, the reality is, with the words that, hey, we're not trying to impede law enforcement, one, I don't see how it could. Because you could have multiple co-defendants, let's say. You know, we have cold cases all the time. And so the point, so one angle here is that thinking that this is that you just say complete, well, we won't do anything other than complete investigations, is not nearly as clean and concise as it might sound. In fact, I would, like I say, arguably say there is no such thing. And I think that goes towards what Representative McGuire was talking about with looking at 15 agencies under this, under those statutes, say this is the access that you have to criminal record information, and it defines what that is. And all of those include, like it says, arrest, detention, indictment. They're when criminal proceedings have started. What this is trying to do is mandate records of an ongoing, of an investigation. And if no charges are brought, now we're into the next step, which is, I have Fifth Amendment concerns with doing this. So you're taking records. We don't have a statute of limitations in Wyoming. So a charge could be brought at any time. So then the military could take it, possibly compel speech, and then they're possibly incriminating themselves, which is why all of this, which is why the law exists, I would say, as it does. Now, in fairness, I asked that question, and they said, the person would have counsel, and our hearings are, that information wouldn't be open to the public. So perhaps that's enough. I don't know. But I would say, as a policy, when we looked at it, we said there's Fifth Amendment concerns. There's problems with impeding current investigations, law enforcement, things like that. And so in the end, we came with this expansion is, so they were originally, they were looking, of course, to increase it to include, before the statute just said prospective employees or volunteers. This still gives them that it increases their ability to get records for military members that are on active duty or currently in the Wyoming National Guard. So we're still doing that. We rejected going as far because I think it is big, and I think it is too far to expand the type and kind of records that the military department can gain access to. Just for an example, of course, this could include completely false allegations. Then those records are brought over, and that's a part of their military record. So it is a policy question, but one that when we discussed, we said it is the way it is for a reason. If the military wants to do its own investigation, they can. But this idea of compelling all of these law enforcement records with this very imprecise, probably inaccurate in actuality, use of completed investigations. So that's my rundown of that, and I know that Representative Burt served in the military and I believe has some thoughts on this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when my personal view on this is spending, my time on active duty and stuff like that, right? And part of my job in the later part of my career before I got out was actually filing a lot of these reports that we would get from out of town. Now, active duty is a lot different than what we have here in the military department for Wyoming, obviously. But some of my big concerns I have are possible double jeopardy that, service members would have out in the civilian world when they come back onto the military base. As Representative Oakley had mentioned, that if there's a false accusation out there, of course, they would go through the investigation process and they would make sure, whether it's false or not. And if it were to be deemed false, we would, with this language, we would allow the military department to have those records. It doesn't stop the military department from working its own investigation. And even if it were to come out with a false accusation, those records would be in a permanent file with that military member or active duty, or whichever way we're going to continue to broaden the definition. And when we look at, we're not supposed to take those false accusations that eventually are dismissed and gone away. We're not supposed to look at that. But I have seen it personally in my time in the military to where it opens up enough of a question of, well, what was that individual doing to even receive a false accusation? And it could be any number of reasons why a false accusation had come out. And within that, it can affect promotions, it can affect deployment. I mean, it could be enough of a question of, well, why was this individual there? What happened to provide this? Now we need to prevent them from, an advancement or a deployment or something until we get to the bottom of it. And that's kind of where my big concerns are, is if the civilian sector is doing its job and deems that there's nothing to move forward with it, then that should be enough. Now, if a member of the military department does something to warrant its own investigation within their rules, then I think that's where their investigation should start, not with the information that has come from an outside source. So I have a couple differences on opinion and view on where we could be leading down the wrong rabbit hole. Maybe the intent is good on some serious cases, but it doesn't limit those. And obviously I don't think we can on constitutionality if we get into that. I just think that if we were to add this language in there, I could see some unintended consequences on the backside that we're not looking at. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Burt. And Mr. Chairman, I guess I would just add 2 comments. So again, the initial question of the military department was making requests and the requests were not being honored. I think that this bill, as worked originally in the committee, I think that fixes that. I think that it makes it obvious that, hey, you need to, these requests are serious. You need to be, and also the language has changed now to include current members. So I think that question, I think that we are good. And in fact, the military department has weighed in and they are satisfied that shouldn't be a problem. I can also just tell you from my experience in my days when I was working in the law enforcement, sometimes you have to ask 2 or 3 times because, again, the custodians of those records are not anxious to give up that information. So you do have to be persistent sometime, and that is a good safeguard. The other thing with regard to safeguards, I would just add in, so we talked about, the good Representative Oakley talked about 5th Amendment and other things. It gets complicated. You have an investigation that involves minors and the record is sealed. And so then, the custodian has to go back to the judge and ask the judge, and that judge may not be there anymore. So then the new judge has to go in and look at it and make a decision, yes or no. And so these things, I guess I would just fall back to, I think that we have a well-vetted system. It's working. It works for the different departments around the state that are involved with criminal justice, and they're checking, they're using the exact same system when they get a new applicant for law enforcement and things like that. So I think that we have a system that's in place and it's vetted, and I guess just me personally, I think that the cautious approach is to stick with the system that's there, but I'd be interested. I'd like to hear your opinions on that.
Yes, yes. You know, I'm really confused on that completed investigation because we vetted that 2 different times in our committee. And everybody that came and testified said completed investigation was the words we need to use on that. We didn't ever have anybody propose any other words. So we just assumed that was something that the military used and the local people knew, the local law enforcement knew what that meant. In my mind, I had a mind what that meant, but I'm confused now. You're saying there's no description for that, but we sure had a lot of people testify that that was exactly what they wanted, was when that was a completed investigation. Now, I thought that was a common description. I don't know, it might be that we have the authority to get that information, but the military department sure says they have trouble with that. And anything we can do to help them to get that information. And it's like Representative Burt says, a lot of times it was not a real charge. And the guy says it wasn't. And then he has to prove it. But then they go and they can't prove it. You know, they go, shit, you had this charge. Well, it was exonerated and they couldn't prove it. So it remained in his record. So in most cases, it was for a guy who was not guilty. And yet here they are looking at it, send him overseas, and he's got this supposed charge on his bill. So anyway, we need something for the protection of the soldier and for the protection of the military. And if you think that does that with line 14 through 19 out, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that yet.
So, Mr. Co-Chairman, thanks, and I appreciate all the words from all of you. That was a lot, and this bill represents a lot. So my concern is, let's just say that we try to go over and sell the Senate on this change. I'm wondering, I'm just thinking structurally, if there's something we can do to assure ourselves, maybe reference back to 709-103 regarding that list of record information. What I'm doing here is admitting that we're probably going to have to get to the House position here, because it sounds like there's not going to be any other alternative. So with that said, we do have some leeway to get into that language and at least reference back so that the people on our side are reminded of the definitions under 103. Would that strengthen that at all, Mr. Co-Chairman? Or
Mr. Co-Chairman, though, did that have military? I know it had a whole list of state agencies.
So I'm lucky as a dinosaur. When I went through school, you know, we still had books, unlike some of the youngsters here. So, you know, the first thing I do is I look at the definitions in the front of the section, and then I page up to what we're talking about. So the definition of criminal history record describes what we're dealing with, and that is 719-106. And you know, the first part of 719-106, which is in our bill, says the record information shall be disseminated. There's no question, it is a shall be, whether it be directly or through an intermediary. So it's there. And you know, it's wrong that our military department ever had an issue with that. That should never, that's one of those things where it just shouldn't have come up, and they shouldn't have had to come to the committee to say, hey, we're having a problem.
So that is not new language.
No, that's all, I mean, that's,
You
go
know
ahead.
what, honestly, you guys, what's discouraging to me is we just missed it throughout an entire interim. And there's 4 of us sitting here that went through an entire interim on this bill and caught none of this. None of this came up. And that discourages me because now it's gone through 2 houses and we're sitting here trying to think if this, I guess my question to the committee is this. Look, I'm willing to try to take this back to the Senate. I just need a little more convincing that that paragraph's enough. Is that going to help our military, or do we get rid of the bill and just say you've already got the capability?
Maybe we should just leave that on. Okay, thank you, Senator. So I don't think anybody was trying to be dishonest. They are, I think their ask, we have some of the asks still in here, but it was an ask for an expansion of the type of records they can get. And I think they honestly said, you know, trying to still get some of these criminal proceeding records, which have never been authorized before, according to the statute. But in order to get a hold of some of those, they said, look, we don't want to impede with law enforcement, so we'll use this completed investigation. And I have all the reason to believe that was done in good faith, and that that's what they mean. I'm just saying that as a practical matter, in criminal law, one, that just isn't, this idea that there's a rubber stamp, it's black and white, it's open, it's closed, guilt or innocence prior to the jury trial. It just isn't how it is. But I think in the end, they are asking for this information. And so I think you did hear that testimony. They were trying to say, look, we'll put the appropriate sideboards. We'll be able to have our military tribunal with a lesser standard to vet some of these things so that it can be only related to their employment, not to a 20-year criminal charge, if you will. But again, in our discussion, then we decided, we see what you're asking for, but that there is just such a history of, as I believe there should be, with that type of information, that only the criminal justice system has just has more access to do investigations, to, you know, do warrants, get this, you know, to get a body of evidence. And so far in our law, we don't allow other people to have access to that. And if you look, as he pointed out, so what number 15 of this 106, which is what we're amending, is the military department. And that's what we would be expanding here, is that they can get a hold of this criminal investigation records done by local and state law enforcement, federal, possibly, right? And when you really start looking at that as a policy, I don't think it's wise. Again, that is what they're asking, and they're welcome to come to our body and ask for that. But when you start looking at constitutional protections, in my mind, and that these type of things are usually, you know, it's a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. And what this does, interesting, let me point out to you as far as completed investigation, but the language says the law enforcement entity conducting the investigation. It's even using present tense. I'm just pointing out, you know, this completed investigation, but then we could clean up language. But the point being, investigations tend to be ongoing. That information is protected. This changes it. That opens a can of worms. And so to your point, Senator Anderson, when you were talking about, and Representative Burt talked about it, about, you know, being completely exonerated. This is what opens the can of worms for that exonerated case, for them to take that investigation and pass it on to the military for bite two at the apple. Without that, they don't get access to those records unless there's a charge. So I say this opens that can of worms, which is why we rejected it. So, so with that, again, that's what the military was asking for. I think it's a big leap to be giving these type of, and oh, finally, and then it ends with shall grant. This is a compelling law enforcement to share the records. And I just think it's too big of a leap with some of the most protected information that we have.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I really respect all of that, certainly do. And in fact, not to the depth of understanding of the good representative, but we knew going into this that therein lies the rub. I mean, we provide information to the military that can be helpful. This was all in the context, remember, in our discussion after a November meeting, upon which we had received the report from the military department in the middle of several media reports that we had some things out of whack in our military department. So this was one of the bills generated out of that conversation, which took place for an entire day or so for all four of us. And so I get where we're going to land on this bill, and I'm hopeful that it will be something. I think I've been convinced that we're at least doing a little bit here. I'm going to ask for a little bit of consideration on language here in a minute, but Senator Anderson, do you have anything? I hope that sort of, my misgivings all rest with that November meeting and a subsequent special meeting in January to deal with some of this. And these bills came out of that context. And it's an effort on our part to make sure that whatever may have happened 10 years ago is not going to happen again. We're going to clean this thing up. We're going to do better. We're going to make sure that we have environments for our National Guard and our military that we expect them to have. And, so whatever we can do with this bill as it now remains, I want to do that today if we can. And maybe it's all we can do, and I respect that too. So, anybody else?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and colleagues here. So I don't want to take this as a light matter because being deployed, I understand where the concerns are sometimes when the military starts looking at things. If I got involved into, a criminal theft ring and now I'm deployed overseas, in the position of being able to sell, information or technology to the enemy. I get the serious nature that it could be, right? And, if you look into sexual allegations or sexual assault, and I can understand the seriousness of the natures as well. But I think when we go in there and we look at, if I'm investigated on something and then it's deemed to be false or whatever reason doesn't go through, and we consider that a completed investigation. I still think going forward, I understand where the military department wants the information and the possibility of why, but I still think we have to protect the presumption of innocence on those that if an investigation is closed, then we owe them that protection as well. And again, if we have a bad individual in the streets, then more than likely it's going to happen again. The military has their own codes for dealing with what the military has. And I just want to go forward and say, we understand the seriousness of why the department's asking for, but we still have to protect the presumption of innocence until they're actually convicted. I think that information needs to be kept, at the level of the investigation and not automatically just pushed out there. So just something to consider out there. I've seen where it's gone sideways, and I've seen where it's destroyed military career men because of, an afterthought. And I don't want to say anybody's out there trying to get a gotcha. I don't think anybody in the military department is trying to set somebody up. But those unintended consequences is what we have to consider as well. And I've seen it destroy careers and families because of it. So just ask for that consideration. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Where do you want to go from here, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Well, and I just wanted to compliment Representative Burt. So yes, presumption of innocence. That's a very important thing.
It is.
I would also note within the definition, so the definition is not just, one line, it's a big definition. It does not include completed investigation. Now, it does talk about non-conviction data. And it talks about, the prosecutor is not elected to commence and other things. And so, again, falling back to the system that's out there, I would just also add, so these investigations these requests sometimes become a back and forth thing. So for example, if you requested information about the good senator from KC, well, that record would be completely clean, be like, boom, nothing there. On the other hand, you can request information and then it brings up other questions. And that's where I was talking about, maybe you'd have to go back to the original judge. So it's not like record request, get it back, okay, we're done. If it brings up a question, then you get into the back and forth and you may go directly to the prosecuting office and talk to the prosecuting office and find out, so all that is within this. And they certainly are entitled to do that. And I think that's what they need without any question. And yes, we're giving them the ability with this bill to do that for current members, active duty and military members. So that's really important to add, to correct that language. I just wanted to make sure that, people kind of understand, again, like when I was talking about a minor, if that record is sealed, DCI can't give you that information. They don't have it. So then you have to go back to the court, and then there's a request to the court. And like I was talking about before, if the judge isn't there, then a new judge has to get it, unseal it, start looking, and it's just, so, it's peeling the onion type of deal. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, when the military decided they'd investigate me for a top secret clearance, they put the FBI to it. And I asked why that, what's that about? And they said, well, a lot of cases we can't get the information, but the FBI can. And so if you have anything you want to confess, you better confess it now. And so they found every speeding ticket that I had, and that's all I had was speeding tickets. But they uncovered everything, from Johnson County and Natrona County. And that's 50 years ago that the military said they couldn't get the records. And so I'm empathetic to them, but the FBI can get the records. Or did, for sure.
I think it's interesting about that, Senator, is that they did their own investigation, which I guess to some extent, that's what I'm kind of like, if you want to do your own investigation, then go ahead rather than compel pre-charge investigation documents from other law enforcement agencies.
One final thing, guys, and I'm certainly willing to take your version of the bill to the Senate, and hopefully they will agree with us to go ahead and pass it into law. But truthfully, I think we all know the information that the military probably could use and needs to have, they really can't get that. They really can't. If you're really trying to clean up anything that could or might happen in the future that would rise to the level of what we dealt with in November and January, you can't really find that out, and I would be the first to admit that. So this was just a little crack at trying to shore that up a little bit, see if we can help the military to carefully vet this thing so we don't have these incidents. We want a clean environment in our military, so.
Well, interesting that you, Senator, just throwing this out there then. So there is a lot of things which is, it's interesting, becomes circular, but if they can't get it, you're saying because specific law that only law enforcement has access to, and that's what we're trying to basically penetrate here, right? Which we rejected as a policy matter. But I think it's interesting that a lot of this seems to go around the discussion, just throwing it out there, being honest, right, is around some sex assault type of allegations or charges. A lot of times when those don't have enough information to proceed, they don't have evidence that is required by a criminal court to prove it without the person speaking, right? And so he said, she said becomes hard to prove. So interestingly enough, with you bringing that up, that the military can't get it, the woman, they could absolutely gain the woman's statements if she wants to. She can give a statement to a military tribunal. So if they're looking for, which is what they are, to do a type of, they're looking to do a hearing with a lower standard of proof. So, and that's hard with sex assault cases. So if they want to actually interview the woman and go forward with that, they can do that on their own without taking the exact same interview or statement, I suppose, from law enforcement. So they can do their own investigation. So I don't really see, maybe they can't do a sex assault kit, let's say. Do you need that when you're talking about a preponderance of the evidence standard? So maybe I don't know enough, but I don't know why they couldn't go forward and get that statement on their own.
All right, Mr. Co-Chairman, our Representative Burt has got a bill signing at 2 o'clock, so I don't want to hold him up on that, but I would throw it back, again, if you were to ask me, I think we should stick with the time-tested, what's in the statute. We're giving them the access to for current members, and I think that is the proper way to do it, but I'm happy to help you guys out with any other language, so.
So I would ask for consideration on this and get you guys' thoughts. So if in the language that remains in the bill, if we come down to line 10, the dissemination of criminal history record information authorized by this paragraph, how about if we put in there and defined in 719-103 shall only occur if required by the department. I just believe that might help on the floor of the Senate. Senator Anderson, does that make sense?
That could, yeah. What did you say about, what was the
Statute.
On line 10, and it's 719-103. The co-chairman has read that a couple of times for us. It's the beginning of the article. It's not needed, I realize that, but if we put that in there, it drives home the fact that we've already defined this.
It's fine with me.
I will say, it is, this is in 719-106, which is access to criminal history record information. And then it's defined in 103 right before that. So it kind of is all in the same section, but it certainly doesn't hurt anything to do that if you want to.
Since we are removing down below, I thought it might be helpful to the Senate to be reminded that it's not like we're striking everything. We've got plenty of language that takes care of this record information, but if you all do not feel like that's necessary, I'll live with it.
Well, important thing, and Representative Burt, whenever you need to go. The important thing is to get the bill passed. I mean, we want to make sure that the military has access for current members and everything. Good bill, we need to get it passed. If that helps you guys out, hey, I'm totally good with it. It's.
You think that will help?
Okay. And go ahead. But I'm just to point out too, I mean, lines 14 through 19 were a second reading amendment by Senator Nethercott. I mean, this wasn't originally in the bill.
That's true, but that's a senator who lives in a military community and chairs our Judiciary Committee, and therefore it packs a pretty good punch in the
Right.
body. And I've got to be aware of that, and
Sure.
we all do, because every now and then we play politics in this building, and so.
And it was, and discussed and rejected by 3 attorneys on the House Judiciary. Just to throw that out there.
Sure. I have no doubt, yeah.
Okay, so
If you're okay with that language, you want to, what's the process at this point, Mr. Co-Chairman? Do you take that proposed language and take it over to your place to include it?
yeah, I think that we have to have LSO has to incorporate that. And then we'll get a, I forget what they call that form.
concurrence sheet,
For both of us.
Take it around and get you guys to sign it?
You do that and we sign it, and us chairman in color, right? We sign it in red.
They don't know. They don't know about that. They're just reporting.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
We're going to add in definition of host on there.
if I can ask for one technical point on this. So you're correct, we will create a JCC report for everybody to sign, and usually it's the chairman that takes it around to everybody, or if Representative Oakley wants to volunteer for that, I'm happy to give it to her to take around for everyone's signature. I would just ask if you would be okay with moving where you're inserting that new language. I want to make sure I got it right so I can create the report properly. But if we put it on line 9, the dissemination of criminal history record information as defined in WS, whatever that definition is, if we put it right there instead of further down, do you have any issues with that? That's just more commonly how we would have an as defined in whatever statute.
I would have done that.
Okay.
I would have done that, but I don't think it fits in the sentence. As defined in authorized. See what happens right there at the beginning of line 10?
If we've got the
You've got-
dissemination of
you've
criminal
got the
history
verb
record information as
authorized.
defined in Wyoming statute, authorized by this paragraph. Well,
You see why I put it after paragraph?
Just what about and, as defined in 719-103 and authorized by this paragraph, shall only occur if required?
If you put an and in there, that might fix it. Representative, you might have hit on it. I couldn't come up with that. So criminal history record information as defined in 719-103 and authorized by this paragraph.
Yeah, that probably.
That fits, doesn't it? I think that'll work. Does that have, does that sound, yeah, okay.
I think that works.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. Okay,
Thank you, guys.
so thank you for getting that to us, and we'll get it to everybody and get it signed. Appreciate you guys, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. We will conclude this meeting. So thank you very much, everybody.